Today we're very honored to have Robin Yates from McGill to deliver us a lecture. Before I pass the floor to Robin, I guess I need to say explain a little bit about why he's here. So yeah, because all has been done quite casually. So Robin, I guess, recently sort of sent me an email saying that he will be in Hong Kong. In late October. Actually, it's actually originally it's a casual setting. It's basically, I guess, if I understand correctly, sort of accompany Grace Fung, his wife, for a lecture at the CHK. And so I asked Robin, since you are here, why don't you give us a lecture at the HKU, which is actually quite far away from what he stay. So, and he kindly agreed with these rather absurd suggestions, because what I envision is a rather informal, semi-informal setting where we had a conference room, but in the lecture hall, and so we can interact and meet some new and old friends together. Well, for me, it seems to be a good idea, but okay, I didn't really consider all the travel, jet lags, and yes, and his tight schedule. But I'm happy. Yeah, great. Thank you, Robin. So for being here. Yeah, okay. Even though Robin is Professor Yates, doesn't really need any sort of introduction. I still probably need to sort of briefly introduce him. So, was Robin Yates served as the James McGill Professor for East Asian Studies and History and Classical Study at McGill University between 2003 and 2023. So since 2023, he was awarded an emeritus professor, and in other words, he's retired. So, okay, among his many publications, I will just he sent me a 49-page CV, so I'm not gonna read them, or otherwise the whole talk will be over. I will restrict myself to several of his publications. First, he wrote in collaboration with Dr. Joseph Needham for volume 5, I guess, of the Science and Civilization in China, which focuses on military technology, missiles, and sieges. And more recently, he's co-author with Professor Anthony Barbary and for a monograph called Law, State, and Society in Early Imperial China, a study with critical edition and translation of the legal text from Zhang Tomb number 247, which won the honorable mention at the book prize at AAS. So I must address one thing. So since Robin's retirement in 2023, he has published 6 journal articles and book chapters. These exclude those that are ongoing and sort of in press and forthcoming. So I must say, Robin, your productivity and creativity is stronger than ever. So that's really something extraordinary. And as far as I understood, the subject of this lecture is part of his book project on the Qin history. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Robin. Please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chun Fung. And one thing I did not tell you is that my sister reached her 80th birthday yesterday, and I'm here. So life is like that. So what this is a part of my ongoing research, and hopefully I'm going to finish a book which I promised to the Zhang Jingguo Foundation a long time ago. And Grace suggested the title inscribed on bamboo and wood, revisiting the first Chinese empire, the Qin. So it's going to be divided into the introduction on the sources and then various 6 parts. And the last part being a small section containing my brief conclusions. So the other thing I need to apologize for is that I am now suffering from an eye problem. And I am blind in my left eye, and I am getting shots in my right eye. And when I return to Montreal, I'm going to see if I can do something about my cataracts. So if I make mistakes, please understand. I just recently wrote an article in a book on disability in early China. So very appropriate. So I do apologize to everyone for that. So first I want to introduce the sources. There are 2 principal types of new textual sources on the material that I'm going to cover. First is scientifically excavated documents, and they come from tombs and wells. And then there are retrieved documents, which were probably looted from Qin tombs in the Yangtze River Valley. And it's highly debated whether one should use retrieved documents or not, or looted documents. And Tony Barbieri and I had a big debate in the book about coming up that Chun Fung mentioned. And we agreed then that looted documents would only appear in footnotes. So you'll find footnote references to particularly the Yuelu type of document, which I will show you, and others not. So he is one of the people who definitely does not believe in using the Yuelu documents or the looted documents. I personally do, because I find it would be impossible not to. So anyway, both of these, both types are generally fragmented, although many scholars have done much work to repair them, and particularly the scholars of in China and Japan. And but I'm really not going to talk about those too much today. So the type 1 is the Qin slips from the tomb of a scribe with a given name of Xi, happy, Xi Huan de Xi, which is in Shuihudi tomb number 11. And then there's the Liye Qinjian, and the 5 volumes were projected from well number 1, and a whole bunch of other new wells have been discovered there recently. But of these, only 3 have been published so far. And it was promised that these would be published every year from 2012 on, and they have not been. So we don't know what's in volumes 3 to 5, but anyway. But these are the partial archives of the Qin County of Qianning, which is in the far west of Hunan. It's in the in a indigenous county there at this point, modern Liye, which means, I think, agricultural fields or something like that. Anyway, then there's also the Zhangjiashan 247 that Tony and I worked on, dating to the early Han, probably in Hubei province. And very recently, there's also just been published the Zhangjiashan 336, which I have worked on. But one thing that is going to come out, I hope, is my study of the consuming qi texts from Zhangjiashan 336. So I know that Ben has already worked on the Gongling chapters. So much more needs to be done. on those. And of course, there are other sites and other documents, particularly seals and seal impressions, which are in Chinese are Fung, and were generally ignored until quite recently, actually. But now I find that they're actually very useful. So this is what the grave of Xi, the owner of tomb number 11 in Shuihudi Yunmeng County, Hubei province, looked like. That's when he was excavated, and note, but he was completely surrounded by these slips. And note that his slips of the Urshu, or the day books, were found by his head, which would suggest that he particularly was interested in Urshu. But when Professor Li Xueqin, the late Li Xueqin, came to Harvard, and I asked him about these back decades ago, and he said, 没有什么意思. They're just missing. No any interest whatsoever. Actually, they're really very interesting. So anyway, the type 2, those are the looted texts, the Qin slips held by the Yuelu Academy and Hunan University and published in 7 volumes. And that's the work that Professor Chun Chang and his team has been working on. And more recently, the slips held by Beidang, they're now published in 5 volumes. And not so much work has been done on those, I think, but there should be. So this is, on the left is the well where the Tianling archive was discovered, and a copy of the volume 4 of the publication of the Qin slips held by the Yuelu Academy. And they all look like, all the publications look like this on the right. And there are very useful photographs and infrared photographs and transcriptions and commentary. So it's a very useful thing. So Dr. Zhang Chonglong of the Hunan Provincial Archive is the one who has really worked mostly on the Liye well materials. So my talk is divided into 6 parts. I've just given you the introduction. And now this is part 1 on the administration relating to religious practice. So first of all, you have the high officials, the chief minister and the chief prosecutor. That's our translation of the Yushadafu. And one of the 9 ministers presumably was the Fung, who was literally bearer of the flag, upholder of the ceremonies, and the minister, we would maybe translate as minister of ceremonies. And he had an aide, Chun, and I used to translate that as assistant, but then that was assistant, there's also Chun much lower down in the hierarchy. And so beneath him were the grand invocator and the director of sacrifices and the director of grand sacrificial butchers. And then there were the local officials, and especially the county magistrate, the county aide, the scribe directors, and the workers and staff, including convicts. So presumably there were also temples and shrines at the commandery or Jun level. Excuse me, I was just in Beijing. And sacrifices were conducted there too, but there is no evidence as of yet of religious activity at that level of the government, so on the, if you like, on the 3 levels. So some of the few officials in the central administration, the seals have been recovered. Notably the Fung, probably Chun, the aide of the Minister of Ceremonies at the capital, and the grand sacrificial butchers, and the director of the sacrifices. Excuse me. and you can read it in Chinese, and your internet connection is unstable, it says. Anyway, so you can read the translation, my translation. I have actually translated almost all of the Yolu documents, but I've not published them yet. And then here's another one. The imperial instruction states, when the director of grand sacrificial butchers, the director of sacrifice, and the grand invocator drink the double fermented alcohol, it is a grand sacrifice. They should carefully purify and cleanse themselves, wash their hair and bathe their bodies. And I'm going to talk more about purity and pollution towards the end of this talk. And manage the sacrifice purely and with discrimination and with added respect from other times, as well as to order. And then it trails off. We don't have the rest of the document, unfortunately, but there we are. In volume 4 of the Yuelu documents, you have a mention of the Xiagui's temple. And the Xiagui is a county which is the northeast of modern Xianyang. So it would appear that they move the temple on a fairly regular basis. And I've not been to Xiagui, and there's now a Xiagui Chun, which you can go and look at, but I have not been there, so I can't tell you what the situation is like. Anyway, so there was a fragmented document in the Liye archive with a revised transcription according to Chun Wei, who is at Wuhan University and the head of that institute on the Tutu Wenxian. And he's published a book in 2012, and it reads as follows in his transcription, and so you can read this. Unfortunately, I don't have all the characters, but anyway, you can read it here. And then in the documents excavated from the Liye well in volume 2, there are documents which suggest that there were 3 men working at the temple, and then 1 person working at the temple. We don't know what they were doing. They were maybe cleaning it or doing something like that. And then on the right-hand side is the documents from Liye 3, which I'm not going to translate. So in the relations between scribes, diviners, and invocators, there are no statutes of scribes that have been discovered from the Qin. So, but there are a few statutes from the early Zhangjiashan Tomb 247 legal texts, which Tony and I have transcribed and translated and analyzed and discussed. And so the points to note there is that all of these scribes, diviners, and invocators were probably initially hereditary functions. And that probably goes all the way back to the Zhou and maybe earlier times. And they were all trained in the same schools and learned probably from documents as well as books, but we don't know what type of text it was or texts that they had. They were tested and examined on their knowledge of these documents, and it would suggest that really the culture, which I'm sure all the students are forced to learn and study for, now derive from these original scribal documents and scribal practices. It appears, as far as I can tell, it's that diviners and invocators did not have to be literate in the same way that scribes had to be. So those who passed the examination better were appointed as scribes because they knew the how to write. And they were appointed, those who were less knowledgeable were just appointed as diviners and invocators. And Tony and I debated whether or not we should use the word cantor initially, but then because of the cantor being a Jewish expression for basically a singer, we decided to end up with the invocator as a translation. So in those documents in the Zhangjiashan, it says that they are these scribes are appointed at quite high levels, and they went up quite high in the bureaucracy. So it's important to note that no statutes or ordinances regarding the functions or activities of scribes have been excavated from the Qin period to date. And the information is derived from the early Han statutes on scribes, scientifically excavated. So, and that's in our book, Law and State and Society in Imperial China, a study with critical edition and translation of the legal text from Zhangjiashan, number 247, which appears in 2 volumes, very small print, and about 1,600 pages, I think, something like that. So the second part is on gods and goddesses. So I can theoretically maybe divide them into 2 types: gods and goddesses worshipped by the state, and gods and goddesses worshipped by the common people. First, the Qin worshipped many official deities and spirits, including the spirits of former Qin rulers, particularly the father of the first emperor of China. And there was also a god of war, who was probably Chirio. Of that, I talk about that in 2 unpublished papers, but they haven't been published. So what can you do? Publish them. Publish them, yes. If Cambridge would, but. And the ancient capital of Yung was full of shrines. And that is the modern Fengxiang in the Shanxi province. And there was an aide to the director of sacrifices at Yung. So I tried to find actually some on the Yung sacrifices, but I'm not sure. I wasn't able to find it in time before I left. Oops, sorry. But in the Yuelu 4, there is the following fragment: temples for sacrificing to Tai Shang Huang, located in the counties and marches. So marches were where many indigenous peoples probably lived. And so that's one of the ways in which the Qin divided up the empire. And Tai Shang Huang was the King Zhuangxiang of Qin, who reigned from this 250 to 247 BCE, and was the father of the first emperor. Oh, sorry, wrong way. The gods and spirits worshipped by the people, on the other hand, were most evident in the day books, in the Ershu. And there is mention of worshipping of the ancestors of the Qin, and there is also mention of sacrificing to the household, the Hu and the Shi. But I honestly don't know what the difference between a Hu, which tends to be a state level, and a Shi was. And I'm not sure what kind of distinction they might have been making there. And there's also mention of the doors and gates and of travel as well. But later on, of course, in starting with the Huainanzi Taoist text of the Western Han Dynasty, there's a mention of the five objects of sacrifice by the common people. And it's not really clear whether the spirits were gendered male or female, as far as I can tell, at least at this point. Maybe I will be able to tell, but anyway. And in the Shui 11 texts, there seems to have been a horse god worshipped at the local level. And here, Professor Roald Sturks suggests that the ritual took place in the spring or early summer and may have been concerned with the fertility of horses. But it may have been taken place in or near the stables in which horses were kept over winter. And certainly there is another horse ritual recorded in the early Han Zhangdashan Tomb 336 documents. But as far as I know, nobody has worked on that yet. So we don't know. In the Liye Tianling County documents, there are fragments of records of sacrifices concerning the first agriculturalist, or the Xianmeng, and what one scholar has suggested is the god of the cellar, perhaps. So we don't know what exactly that term of, or how to read that term. And the sacrifices seem to have included both meat and grain offerings as well as salt. And the remains of the sacrifices, especially offal and juices, were sold to convicts. And of course, this raises the question, how could convicts possibly have money to buy the remains of the sacrifices? Well, presumably they did. But they're very, very small quantities of cash. And each item that was sold was carefully recorded by the officials on a separate register. And there is one published in Liye 3, which just came out very recently. There's another one which puts together two documents. So, really all of these documents really raise a number of questions, and one of them being, how is it that a convict could possibly have cash, spare cash to pay for it? You know, one doesn't know about that. So among the goddesses, there is a silkworm goddess, and this is seen in the Beida Chin texts. Again, as far as I can tell, nobody's worked on that yet, unfortunately. But silkworm goddess came to be very important later on, all the way through into the Qing and probably into the Republic period too, right? The silkworm goddess. So it's early. This is early times yet. And seem to have been river goddesses like the spirits of the Xiang, which is mentioned in the Shiji by Sima Tian. But of course, they are supposed to have been the mythical daughters of the mythical emperor Yao and wife of the mythical emperor Chun. But it's not very clear whether there are two daughters or one daughter or what, at least at the moment. So, but there is no mention of the Xiang River goddess in excavated texts, as far as I know. And there is also no mention of the great mother of the West, the goddess of the West, who's been the Siwang Mu. And there have been quite a lot of studies that have taken Siwang Mu all the way back to the Shang dynasty. But Siwang Mu became very important in late Western Han times, all the way through the TONG and into the Song and later times. So the Qin there were lots of bad demons, ghosts, or spirits. there are a huge number of maleficent supernatural entities. They could be exorcised, but they were present everywhere, including in houses. And so they're most clearly evident in the Urshu, and most obviously in the text which Don Harper of the University of Chicago, when he was still at Stanford, studied in a Chinese demonography of the 3rd century BC, published in the Harvard Journal of Asiatic Studies in 1985. So I move on to laws concerning sacrifices. So it seems very clear that the Qin promulgated statutes, maybe, and ordinances, definitely, concerning the Yuelu volume 6. There is a mention of internet, is it? Okay. Ordinances for diviners or invocators, double fermented alcohol, as well as other sacrifices, which suggests, of course, that there were other A, B, C, D, Jia, Yi, Bing, Ding in Chinese, but exactly how far they go, we do not know. And then there was also ordinances on sacrifices A, Jia again. So, so there was presumably a set of ordinances for both categories of types, but you know, the contents were different, and we don't know yet what those differences were. But in Yuelu 6, there is this document, and I should mention that the strip number, archaeological strip number, comes second, and each volume has the different numbering, Arabic numerals, 100 and 101 in this case. So for all cases of providing sacrifices not according to the ordinances, fine each person responsible 2 sets of armor. The grand invocator, the director of sacrifice, and the director of grand sacrificial butchers immediately are to lodge an official accusation and sentence the persons responsible for the sacrifices that the governor of the capital area oversees, and that's the nation. And this is one of the reasons why I suspect that probably the Fengxiang or Yong would have been in the nation. And I suspect also in the commanderies there would have been sacrifices too. He is to order the assistant of the governor of the capital area, where that's the aide, together with the accessory scribes, and those Zhushi are people who are assigned at the commandery level, at the Dun level, to be careful to make an inspection and to lodge an official accusation against those who do not match their responsibilities and to sentence them. Should they match lodging an official accusation and they do not lodge one, they are to be fined 1 set of armor. I won't go into the Qin system of fines. And then there's another one in Yuelu 6 where the imperial instruction states, when the director of grand sacrificial butchers, the director of sacrifice, and the grand invocator drink the double fermented alcohol, it is a grand sacrifice. And I think I mentioned that before. And they should wash their hands, they should wash, purify and cleanse themselves, etc. So the following is a fragment that implies that there were Qin statutes on statutes, that's Liu, on sacrifices, and the Qianling copyist might have made a mistake. And what he was actually quoting was an ordinance, a Ling, not a Liu. But we don't know. And so in Yuelu 3rd volume, it's in strip number 981, it says the statute says sacrifices, and then we don't know what it says. So maybe in volumes 4 and 5, there will be more information. We don't know. We hope so. But, you know. So in the early Western Han, there were definitely statutes on sacrifices, as some have been recovered in the tomb at Hujia Taochang. But they haven't been yet published in full, unfortunately. I'm still waiting, and I hope that they will start publishing them very soon. Before I pass on. In addition, there seem to have been statutes on the La Festival. That's the La Festival is the first, the festival at the beginning of the year. Excuse me. And they have statutes, as I said, statutes on sacrifices. So when an official whose salary is ranked at 2,000 bushels of grain does not rise because of a sickness, sacrifice with a bull. When the family is in Chang'an, a receptionist or yejun is to present the sacrifice for a functionary whose salary is ranked at 1,000 to 600 bushels, sacrifice with a hog and an ovid. And I use the word ovid simply because you can't tell in Chinese whether a yang is a sheep or a goat. And archaeologists have not been able to figure out from studying bones whether they are sheep or goats either. So this clearly shows that they had sacrifices and statutes on sacrifices. And of course, the bull sacrifice, it appears in the Shiji too, and other early texts of the first emperor of China being really mad because, anyway, I won't go into that. People were sacrificing bulls for his health. Anyway, so this is the statutes on the La Festival or the La Ritual that have been published so far. Not much. So you can read that. And if an official is purifying himself in the sexual and has sexual relations with his wife or his female slave, as well as if he engages in illicit sexual relations, in all cases, cast him away in the marketplace. In other words, execute him. When he matches providing the utensils for sacrifice and fails to provide them, as well as when he places them for the ghosts and spirits and he does not offer them together, maybe, or when the person matches purifying him or herself and providing and sacrifices and he or she fraudulently avoids doing it, should it be sacrifices in the ancestral temple or to supreme deities, shave and make him or her a male or female bondservant. And there are lots of debates about whether the Li Chun is that a slave or is it a convict? And I won't go into that. And for other sacrifices, fine 12 liang of gold, and that's basically the other word for that would be tael, T-A-E-L, tael of gold. So a very heavy fine. For other cases of not behaving according to the ordinances, in all cases, fine gold, or maybe 1 jin of gold, 1 liang of gold. We don't know exactly what that means. So what were the objects of sacrifice? The various types of meat, as I've already explained, and there were also fish, and probably also salt as well, as I mentioned. But we don't know for sure because there's nothing that's been published yet to explain. So I'm going now to part 4, to the hemorrhology and religious practice. And hemorrhology relates to the day books. So determining things according to the hemorrhology derives from Greek and hemera, a day, and logos as well. So we use the term hemerology. So sacrifices had to be performed only on particular days, according to the Shwehudi Tomb 11 texts. And these sacrifices included offerings to the gods as well as to dead ancestors or predecessors. And now we come to part 5, concepts of purity and pollution. And this builds upon my essay that I wrote many years ago on purity and pollution in early China, which I published in Taiwan. And it's the 中国考古学与历史学综合研究, edited by Zhang Chunhua, who's now retired. And I probably should have done too earlier. Excuse me. So in that essay, I noted that the legalist classic, the book of Lord Chun, the Shang Jun Shu, which you're known as a legalist text, it actually contains large quantities of purity and pollution language. And that pollution language was prominent in matters of music theory, in relations between men and women, and matters to do with sacrifice and the spirits, including the cases of illness caused by malevolent spirits with regard to crime, punishment, and warfare, and in the context of government administration. So what I would argue is that actually warfare was a way of getting rid of pollution in early China. And really the basic problem, which I talk about in this article for women, was that their bodies, and their bodies are, essentially polluted and polluting because they menstruate. So it's bodily blood. And I drew in my analysis in this article on the anthropological work of Mary Douglas in her Purity and Danger, an analysis of the concepts of pollution and taboo, which was basically about pollution and taboo in the West. And Gloria Goodwin-Raheja's The Poison in the Gift, Ritual Prestation in the Dominant Caste in a North Indian Village in 1988. And she also is an anthropologist. And if you study early China, I would strongly suggest you look at Indian material too. There's a lot of similarities. And I also drew on French scholars of ancient China. So Jean-Pierre Vernon, in his 1988 chapter called The Pure and the Impure, which was translated into English by Janet Lloyd, and who translated in Myth and Society in Ancient Greece. Actually, it was a review published in the L'Année Sociologique much earlier in the 1950s. And he explained that, quote, physical cleanliness affects more than simply the body. The stain that makes it dirty blemishes the individual and makes him ugly, affects his inner being, his social and moral personality. It also debars him from any contact with the gods. Before taking part in any religious ritual, a man must wash himself. And so, of course, in modern China, or in 20th century China, I should say, that women were not allowed to go and worship, go into temples and worship when they were menstruating. They were not allowed to go into fields and work in the fields when they were menstruating. And this was in the People's Republic, it was explained, well, it was not healthy for people to do that. It's nothing to do with health, actually. But anyway. So I argue that, in other words, purity and pollution concepts formed part of a symbolic code or structure in religious thought that was manifested, created, and manipulated in ritual contexts, as well as in normal daily life. It was a symbolic code or discursive formation of late warring states and Han times manifested in thought and practice. And in my article, I go on and debate that, and I debate the concepts of that people have suggested that there was a distinction, but that some draw on in early China about let's say the concepts of, well, say the concept of purity and pollution go on into Buddhist practice in later imperial China. Let's put it that way. I don't want to criticize people. So officials and other staff performing religious rituals or providing services had to be clean and pure and not engage in polluting activities like having sex. And note, government buildings in general had to be pure and clean too. So if you read the document of in the Yuelu Zhouyan Shu text, there an official is very mad because this couple who really shouldn't be having sex had sex in the government building. Well, this was not the right thing to do. Definitely not the right thing to do. But of course, Lau and Lütke who have translated this into German, don't study this, aren't aware of this at all. So, but it's true that you have to be pure and clean and not engage in sex. And places of worship had to be pure and located in appropriate spots and not subject to polluting water or other damage. And if you remember, I gave you the Xiagui temple having been moved, and so presumably maybe it was floods or something like that. We don't know. And there were other documents in the excavated documents that mention this. So documents related to purity and pollution. If you look at the document appended to the letter of Governor Tong in the Shui Di tomb number 11, which is possibly a separate text, and you can see at the very beginning there, and I translate, in general, good officials clarify the laws and statutes and ordinances. There is no matter in which they are incapable. Further, they are honest, pure, and sincere. And they, of course, love to assist their superiors, like we all do, right? We still do. So in Beida Qin documents, there's a text called the Zhong Zheng Zhijing. And this work also starts out emphasizing the importance of officials to be pure. And then if you look at later imperial times, all the way through the Qing dynasty, officials had to be pure in order to practice this. And of course, they had to be male as well, but probably because females were polluting. We won't go into that. So in the Yuelu text, there is this document, and I translate the Tai Guan as the provisioner. With respect to the ways in which the providing counties give or loan the food supply offices, presumably that's something, a Qin system, vessels and mats, as well as hairpins, baskets, and rough bamboo coverings. Regularly, they do not distinguish and separate them or store them separately. And they exchange the vessels with other offices so that the vessels do not maintain their cleanliness and purity. I petition blah, 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 and go on like that. So actually, it's quite similar to halal practices and Jewish practices too. So it's nothing particularly special, I don't think, about early China. So henceforth, it is ordered that with respect to the ways in which the providing companies can give or loan the food supply offices vessels, they are to carefully to be careful in making distinguishing and separating marks and to store them separately. The reason is to maintain purity. When they are forwarded to the purification building and an inspection is made, record those who do not follow the ordinance and fine the county, the aide, the magistrate, and the scribe directors, and the bailiff of the office concerned, and functionaries, each 2 sets of armor. So this is the Chun regulations. So the provision appears in Yuelu 4, slip number 33, and according to Haka, he was one of the chief subordinates of the Shaofu, or the chamberlain for the palace revenues. And he was responsible for providing meals for the palace with a salary ranking from 600 to 1,000 bushels of grain per year. And I interpret the Tingsher, the purification building, as the name of an official building, along with the Yuelu editors, Professor Chun Chang and his team. Needless to say, this provides more information about the organization of Qin Palace buildings, although we do not know where the building mentioned in the text was located. And the Chinese archaeologists, I don't think, have identified this. Maybe they have, but they are not. It was obviously something which was very important in Qin practice. In Yuelu 5, there is this ordinance, in Ling Yue, the ordinance states, as for shrines supplied by the state, the functionaries, black-headed ones, those are the black-headed ones are the peoples who are Qin people. They are Qin people, and then there was the new black-headed ones, people who are taken over by the Qin. And government labor servants who are purified are to supply the shrines when the shrine has not yet been closed and they venture to commit fornication, either with their wives, their female slaves, or engage in sexual activity with ... we don't know. They are all to be cast away in the marketplace. In other words, they should be executed. And should they ... we don't know. So how did one purify oneself and ensure that the sacrifices were acceptable to the gods? Probably one had to purify oneself for 3 days, and that's really in the Zhuang you mentioned. Not so much in the Qin documents that I've come across, but anyway. They had to eat vegetarian food. They had to abstain from engaging in sexual relations. They had to wash their hair and bodies. They had to wear clean clothes. And in my article, I give a long list of all the terms that are used for purification and pollution as well. So, and in order for the offerings to be acceptable, the offerings had to be abundant. They had to be presented in clean and pure vessels. And then one could not engage in sexual activities in sacred buildings. So that's all those things. And so you have here some examples of, in the Yuelu text. Again, Professor Chun Chang and his team has not really explained why it is, what's going on here. But I think I have a reason. So, interestingly enough, in Yuelu 6, there is this mention of sacrifices are great affairs, what superior desires, ... Those who provide sacrifices, blah, blah, blah. Right conduct produces, blah, 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 and we don't know. And this is in accordance with what is said in the Zhuang as well, that sacrifices are great affairs. So, is Qin Confucian or not? Well, it raises lots of questions. But anyway, I conclude that the Qin state spent huge resources on numerous religious sacrifices, including sacrifices to the dead Qin rulers. And this continued into the Han, definitely. and religious activities were at the heart of the Qin enterprise. So large numbers of shrines were located in the former capital of Yong, which is modern Fung, Shanxi province, which is currently undergoing excavation, but mostly on the tombs of the Qin rulers, not on the rest of the city, unfortunately. The Qin established state temples in every county they created throughout the subcontinent that they had conquered, and maybe elsewhere too. And I mean, they might have gone elsewhere. We don't know. The Qin people also seem to have taken sacrifices very seriously and made offerings to multiple deities as well as to their ancestors. And so here I just note that the earliest record of ordinary people sacrificing to their ancestors is to be found in the Taoist classic Huainanzi in the Western, under Han Wudi, in the Western Han dynasty. So actually this goes back earlier in time. So the day books, the Ershu, came to be essential guides for everyday life. And you see that in the Western Han documents that have been excavated in along the Silk Road as well. And so many daily practices were concerned with exorcising demons and evil spirits, and maintaining and purity and avoiding or expunging pollution was a central practice of the Qin government, as it was among the people. Consequently, one can say that pre-modern Chinese religious practices began with the Qin, which is not what normally people think. The Qin probably based them on earlier religious beliefs and practices, and I haven't gone into those yet. So, in short, the Qin state and empire were deeply concerned, and I would say almost obsessed, about religious matters and in purifying the empire that they had created according to their own beliefs and practices. And this view is very far from the notion that the Qin were totalitarian and were attempting to create a rational, bureaucratic imperial system in the mode of Max Weber. They were much more complex and interesting, I think, than that. So thank you very much indeed.
So, fascinating talk, rich in detail, and well, I would say previously unknown details. So I think we still have around half an hour, so we might take some. I guess we can accept some questions. And
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the talk.
Yes,
My name is Marcelo. Yeah, I'm up in the sixth department, a couple
Couple of flights up.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, wandered down here. I'm very unfamiliar with this topic. It's quite fascinating. And so I have a couple of sort of clarification questions and stuff of that nature. So, first of all, I was wondering about dating for these bamboo strips. Right? So they're dated pretty precisely, it seems.
Yes. Some of of course, they are fragmented, but some of them, we know that the Xi's tomb was closed about 217 before the Common Era, just after the first emperor supposedly unified China and established the empire. And they did that in 221. There's a Lunggang slips that are slightly later than that from another site, which are even more fragmented. And then the Yuelu documents are probably slightly later than that, but still in the Qin Empire. So Zhang Jiashan, people, 247, people have suggested that it's around 186 before the Common Era. And then I think Professor Ben Ma has been working on the Zhang Jiashan 336. So it's a little bit later than that. So it's all of these things are basically Qin or early Western Han.
So that actually leads me to my next question, which is about Yuelu text specifically. So I was wondering, do you make anything of the location where they were found? And the fact that it's in Western Hunan, which is, as I understand it, quite a peripheral region for the Qing state, right? And even in Hunan today, it's a very sort of, in a relatively peripheral area of Hunan. I was wondering if you make anything of that.
Well, the Liye is far to the west in western Hunan, and it's now in a minority area, the Tujia new in Xiang. So it's right on the borders of Chongqing. It was Sichuan,
Yeah, it
but
was
it's not. It was Sichuan, but now it is Chongqing.
Yeah, both right. So
But the Yuelu documents, there is a debate. I have a debate with Professor Tong, who thinks they were taken from a single tomb. I'm not so sure. Maybe they were taken from two different tombs. So maybe some of these documents were put together. But and then, well, they went. Yuelu documents are looted, so they probably came from a tomb. But the Liye documents were dumped down the well, and as I mentioned, that now the archaeologists have found other wells in this little town, and probably Liye itself was Tianling County, but it was originally Chu, established by the state of Chu, and the state of Chu, which was based on the middle Yangtze River, pushed out towards Sichuan, which had been occupied by the Qing. So it was a border area. Okay, so that's it's clear, I think, that some of the Qin had a hard time try to make sure that these people who they had to rely on local scribes, and local scribes did not know necessarily true culture, Qin culture, sorry. So archaeologists have used some objects. So in the case of Mr. Xi, and we don't know his surname, so we don't know his given name. There are two different types of day books. One is for Chu, the state of Chu, and one is for Qin. And in the Governor Teng's letter, it said, oh, they really should learn how to be Qin. But in that area, it had been occupied by Qin for at least 40 years and still hadn't been. So what? 60 years. Okay. 40, 60 years, yeah. But by the time you get to the Western Han, the Huainanzi that I mentioned, the Taoist text, you have no mention at all of Chu. So it's only the Qin system that survived. And the Han took over the Qin system. But the Han, the leaders of the Han were actually people from Chu, state of Chu. So it was obviously very complicated then. So I suspect that probably in the Western Han, there are some documents which say very clearly that that the Man-yi peoples didn't know how to speak Chinese, so they had to have translators, and the Han had a bureau of translation. But when you get to the Eastern Han, all the Man and Yi, there's no mention of translation anymore. They all speak and understand Chinese. So that's another topic that really needs further research.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Chris.
So Have you uncovered or do you have any theories about the reasoning behind the need for purification? Because what you made me think about is that there's a lot of language about purification at once.
Yes.
And I think it's fairly clear in Mozi that the purpose of purification is to show respect to Tian Di Shen. You're showing respect to these deities. So it's not so much that the human like self is regarded as impure in some way. I've contrasted with a Christian, conception in which sin somehow renders me impure. Yeah. So it's rather a gesture of respect.
Yeah, possibly, but I think that the human body Mozi and the Mohists tend to be male.
Sure.
Whereas I'm interested in the female. So
yeah,
and they are polluting, and but once they reach menarche, once they reach before menarche, the beginning of menstruation, they are pure. So in the Zhuangzi, you have children, TONG, are pure. But then TONG is also the term that is used for slaves. So I wish more people would did work on this problem. But once you reach old age, women stop menstruating and then they become more like men. So then they can take on the positions in society, and then they can start doing things that men could do all along. So I suspect that there's much more that needs to be done on these texts. So the Mozi and the so-called Rujia, the so-called Confucian texts. And if the Shangjun Shu, the text that is primarily legalist, is full of pollution languages, I think, then it's probably much more widespread than we've taken it.
It's probably there in the popular culture.
It's probably there in the popular culture, but I suspect that it becomes more important and it's more written about. We have more evidence for it.
It's particularly interesting that in line with the purification and sacrifice practices, that this illicit sex,
yes,
is, in every case that you cited, is punishable by death.
Yes.
So, do we have some sort of hypothesis about why that's regarded as so?
Well, as I said, that it's obviously extremely important to maintain purity.
Yeah.
So, if death is the punishment, but the Qin seem to like to kill people for lots of things.
Normally speaking, committing illicit sex, sexual intercourse, won't render sort of death penalty, but it seems to be an extraordinary case because of the purity of purification. So this sort of polluted.
That's very meaningful, by the way. That's very meaningful.
Yeah.
But sex is something very private. So you have to someone accuse you have this problem. Otherwise,
Yes.
no one knows.
That's right. And the other thing is that in the Zhangjiashan texts of the so-called Soyanshu, it would appear that you had to be caught in flagrante delictu. In other words, in the act. And that also appears in the Yuelu documents, the Zhongyuanshu. So how do you do that? That's, you could say, yeah, surely you could say, I'm sorry, I didn't do anything.
Yeah,
what do you mean?
Exactly. I think it's
What are you talking about?
just
Yes. And then say, oh, well, I actually admitted doing it. Or she admits you do it. Then, okay. execution. So there's another very interesting case where a woman refuses and this is not in the Yuelu, and it is in the Yang text, of a woman who refuses to pass cash round in the marketplace. And the term is xingqian, movable cash. And so the officials in Yiyang, and that's Yiyang is in, it's still Yiyang, execute her. And she's deposited in the cemetery after 10 days after being exposed in the marketplace. And then I have a whole thing about marketplaces, because marketplaces are yin, as opposed to yin and yang, you know. And if an official or a high-ranking individual passes through the marketplace when there is somebody about to be executed, then that person is freed. Unfortunately, this woman didn't have that opportunity. So she was killed. She was executed. So there's lots more that can be done with this, I think.
I wonder, does this bamboo pieces now publicly accessible or?
Well, in the Zhangjiashan 247 is, Shuihudi 11 is, Yuelu is not so accepted, at least not accepted by my colleague and partner in crime, Tony Barbieri, so who feels that you shouldn't publish anything that uses this material. But I think that mainland scholars don't really care about whether or not it's really looted or not. And so much has been published on Yuelu now that it's by the mainland scholars, especially by Japanese scholars. So it's very hard not to take that into consideration. Yeah, please.
Thank you for the. I have a question. My name is Jenny, by the way. I have a question regarding when you talk about purification and the fact that they consider the ordinance polluted in this regard. I wonder if we can compare whether it's a general consideration of the gender difference, because if we compare this passage with another one, Chun, the one the famous passage in Chun, in which Sichuan talks about those people who were special and who were purified. 明知经爽不二者，在男曰夫，在女曰媳。So clearly it includes both genders. So I'm wondering if this reflects a kind of a geographical differences like appointing religious specialists.
It could be. And the thing is that most of the Rujia texts seem to have been coming from northeast China, so near Shandong. So most of these texts come from the south. But then you have the problem of, for example, of wearing clothes. And if you cut clothes, presumably this was a female occupation of making clothes. But you find in the even in the Western Han, in the Northwest, in the Xuanquan documents, the cutting of clothes being considered you can only do that at certain days of the year. So it would appear as though that there were maybe two different things. But then, the Shuo Jiezi, which it is a standard work, well, it does talk about pollution a lot. And that's what I refer to in that article that I mentioned, that published years ago. So, Shuo Jiezi is fairly fairly acceptable. So maybe it's very hard to say whether, individuals accepted it or not. And obviously some didn't. Probably someone like Wang Chung in the early Eastern Han didn't. But maybe a lot of people, a lot of Ru scholars did, I think we're just really at the beginnings of trying to figure this out. Yeah.
Mark Meulenbelt.
Yes.
So thank you for a really interesting talk. There was almost no slide that I didn't want to ask questions about or wish that we could just be in a conversation instead of just on this. So there's many things I would like to ask, but I will keep myself limited. A lot of these things that you were talking about were new and at the same time old. Old because if looking from the perspective of later periods, you can recognize a lot of what you described.
Mm-hmm.
New because I didn't know that there's this kind of detail already in the era. So one of the things that I'm interested in is the terminology used, for example, for purification, but also for sacrifice. In the sense that many of these terms later on they become standardized as ritual categories. For example, Chai, right, is a ritual category, not just a word for purification itself, but it becomes a ritual. And Si, of course, and so there's other examples. So I would like to ask, you use your purification, but there are several words in Chinese. So there's Chai, Chai Jie, there's Qing, there's Jie. There's other Yu, other terms that you describe. So can you distinguish between the meanings of these words? Are they different kinds of purifications, or even more interesting to me, do they represent distinct ritual categories? That's question number one about purification. And very quickly, question number two, attached to it, the word ci. Which you translate with sacrifice, is later on, of course, translated as enshrining if used as a verb, or simply as a shrine. So that's a different sense, even though, of course, sacrifice would be involved. But can you? Is there a specific meaning of the word "ci" that is different from "si"? Or not? Is it simply one?
Well, in my article that I wrote years ago, I did try to distinguish the words for purification, whether it's washing the hair, washing the body, washing clothes, whatever. So there I had it. I have not done it for the sacrifices. And, I have a feeling that probably there were different words being used in these early texts, but I haven't done a study, for example, of the Ershu to see whether the texts that are referred to as Chu are different from the texts that are referred to as Qin, and whether Ji and Bu Xiang or inauspicious, it's not too clear to me yet. So far, Jai, yes, it does become a ritual, and feeding is a ritual. But Mary Douglas, in her work as obviously How to Decipher a Meal, goes into that. So yes, we know when people have a meal, then there's a ritual about feeding people and how you eat it. And of course, there are geographic differences. So, for perfect example, is soup. Now, do you eat soup before, at the beginning of a meal or afterwards? Do you eat salad at the beginning of a meal or afterwards?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was interested in a casual reference to ancestor worship first showing up in finance.
Yes.
If you 祭祀,
Well, the thing, I mean, that I should say that the ordinary people are first mentioned as having, ordinary people, as opposed to aristocrats. Aristocrats had their own miao and own temples very early on in
Right.
Western Zhou times, probably into the Shang as well.
Yeah. Okay. So would you say 祭祀 would be?
Well, that's again, you see, that's a question to answer Professor Muhlenberg.
Yeah.
Is it Ji or is it Sir? Does it become a Ji Sir?
Okay, because in Mozi, see, if people tend to have a deep misunderstanding of the Moists, they're largely opposed to Di.
Yes.
They're very enthusiastically committed to Jisu.
Yes. Absolutely.
You are supposed to.
And they Ming Gui.
Yes, and when your parents die, after the funeral, you're supposed to Jisu
Yes.
to your parents.
Yes.
And that's definitely common people. So I'm wondering if that's something that's been overlooked.
Well, maybe. May well be. May well be. Right about it.
Yeah.
It could well be. It could well be.
Hi, I don't know if it's appropriate to unmute myself.
So
Oh.
no, but could you please introduce yourself? Yeah, do you have a
Oh,
question?
I already typed my question in the
Okay.
chat, so if somebody can read it.
Open the chat box.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look at this.
Okay.
Do you want to read the
Yeah, just curious, is the lack of mention of certain gods or goddesses in the excavated or looped documents a result of original factors or of a selective preference in what was recorded or unrecorded on the slips?
Well, I would say that we have a very biased view of what is found in the slips, and it's very arbitrary. So I think that there may be religious and differences. There may be regional differences, and obviously, I mean, we don't know for sure why a particular scribe had certain texts put in his tomb. Maybe it was because of particular interest. Maybe because his friends or his relatives or his descendants thought about that this is what he would like. So we don't really know, and why certain texts are thrown away in wells by officials. Why did they do that? So we don't know that. Nobody talks about it and explains. So we can speculate, yes, but it's not really clear. But thank you very much for your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Questions. Among those slides, I'm just out of curiosity, who were executed in terms of all those sects? Because based on the context, that the 接气势, there are two different ways to understand it. It can be describing whether you're having sex with your wife, your concubine, or mistress. The men were executed in all those different situations, or the woman will also execute. But based on the context, it's unclear. So do we have any other evidence to suggest who were actually executed? only the man or the woman as well? Because the woman might not know he was undergoing.
Yes, the men might not know either. We don't know. And of course, the other thing is that it's still highly debated, I think, as to whether or not any of these executions took place. Or whether you could just simply pay cash and get out of this. But in this particular case that I mentioned about the woman being executed in the marketplace and having her corpse thrown out in the cemetery, that she definitely was killed.
Having a corpse, what happened to the corpse?
Sorry?
You say having her corpse, what? What happened?
Oh, corpse thrown out in the cemetery after 10 days. Probably not a very nice thing. Not a very nice thing. But anyway, she did that. So Professor He Zhu has written an article about this particular case. So he's at Wuhan University. So it's not really clear whether or not who gets punished. And even in the case of the text that I mentioned of these two people being caught polluting a building by having sex, it's not clear that what happens to them, and whether it's the woman and or the man, or whether it's the man who is presumably responsible for it. I don't know. I don't know yet. Maybe it'll come out.
I hope so, I guess. Okay, it's 2 minutes for no, it's 1 minute to 6. But I guess if there's no further question, I guess we should thanks Professor Yates again for